Good evening, fellow directors, past presidents, members, students, alumni, and guests. Welcome to the 115th season of the Empire Club of Canada and our inaugural speaker series co-hosted with the University of Toronto. My name is Kent Emerson. I am the president of the Empire Club of Canada and your host for this evening's event. The Empire Club is very pleased to embark on a new partnership with U of T, presenting speakers together that matter. The Empire Club U of T partnership aims to reach out to a student demographic benefiting the Empire Club and business leaders so students better understand the workplace benefiting the University of Toronto. And no topic is more important to start with than artificial intelligence. Before I introduce Heather Kelly from U of T, I'm going to thank our sponsor today, which is University of Toronto, the sponsor today, which is CIBC. Thank you very much, CIBC, for putting on this event. Also, thank you. Yeah. Our media partner is National Post, and also thank you to mediaevents.ca for doing the live webcast that we have here today. Without sponsors like these, the Empire Club events would not be possible. And now I want to welcome Heather Kelly, Senior Director of Student Success at the University of Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kent. As mentioned, my name is Heather Kelly, and I am the Senior Director of Student Success in the Division of Student Life here at the University of Toronto. As we begin this event this evening, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We recognize that the world is changing faster than ever before, and so our goal at Career Exploration and Education is to support all U of T students and recent graduates as you build your future in a changing world. It is predicted that AI will have more influence on our lives and the livelihoods of young people over the next several decades than any other factor. So, we are very pleased to welcome Professor Sven Dickinson, and we hope you will take full advantage of the opportunity to network following this evening's lecture to engage in a conversation about how we can shape a future that works for everyone. So now I'd like to return the podium to Kent, who will introduce this evening's speaker. Thank you.
This evening's topic is Future Ready, Understanding AI, Future Impacts. We are all eager to understand what effect AI will have on our workplace, on jobs, on healthcare, and our everyday lives. One thing is clear, AI is here, firmly ensconced in our local and national communities, so we need to continue to brace for it. The University of Toronto has also embraced AI. U of T is at the forefront of AI with minds like Geoffrey Hinton and Sven Dickinson. This is true according to a January 2018 article of Toronto Life dedicated to Dr. Hinton in his early struggles pioneering the science of AI. Professor Hinton knew at an early age how information in the human brain worked, spread across a vast network of cells linked by an endless map of neurons, firing and connecting and transmitting along a billion paths. He wondered, could a computer behave in the same way? He believed the answer was yes, but as a researcher, he was on the fringe, receiving no support for his ideas for many years. The problem was that computers at the time were not powerful enough to verify his ideas, and when computing power increased, it opened up the world for AI and for Hinton, and paved the way for others to excel in their work, including today's speaker, Professor Sven Dickinson. He excels in his pursuit of the problem space around shape perception in computer vision, and more recently, human vision. Much of his recent work focuses on the perceptual grouping and its role in image segmentation and shape recovery. With AI research coming into the mainstream, prompting investments into AI by major corporations such as Facebook, Google, Apple, and of course Samsung, it's no wonder Samsung sought after Professor Dickinson. As head of Samsung's Toronto AI Research Center, Dr. Dickinson has an opportunity to bring his research to life during his sabbatical. When Professor Dickinson accepted his posting at Samsung, he was ecstatic about all the possibilities. Quote, "If you look at Samsung's products, people interacting with their TVs, phones, appliances, smart homes, maybe personal robots, eventually you really have to bring all these components of AI together, and it's really exciting," he said. And I'm excited to introduce Sven Dickinson today. Sven Dickinson has a Bachelor of Applied Science degree in Systems Design Engineering from the University of Waterloo and a Master's of Science and Ph.D. degrees in Computer Science from the University of Maryland. He has received the National Science Foundation Career Award in Government of Ontario, the Premier's Research Excellence Award, and the Lifetime Research Achievement Award from the Canadian Image Processing and Pattern Recognition Society. He currently serves on 8 editorial boards. He is also a Fellow of the International Association for Pattern Recognition. Please give a warm welcome to the past chair of the Department of Computer Science at the University of Toronto, Vice President, Chief Scientist, and Head of the Samsung Toronto AI Research Center, Professor Sven Dickinson.
That's great. Thank you. You hear me okay? Excellent. Thank you, Heather and Kent, for the really kind introduction. Needless to say, it's an incredible honor for me to be here. Both the Empire Club and the U of T are very prestigious institutions, and I'm very grateful for the invitation. Really happy that there's students here and even some of my family here, so it's a real treat to be here. Thank you very much. Okay. Let me take you back about 30 to 35 years. When I started out my career as a grad student, I was assigned to the project called the Autonomous Land Vehicle, a DARPA program in the US, and this is really the precursor of what you've heard about autonomous driving these days. It was a very large system, as you can see there, 8 wheels, it's about 8 to 10 feet high, and it's full of diesel engines and air conditioners and racks of computers and sensors, and as you might expect, the goal is to drive down the road. Here's a DARPA promo shot showing the autonomous land vehicle laser blasting everything in its path. Actually, it's not. It's using its laser rangefinder to scan everything in its path because it needs to avoid the obstacles like this rock. In fact, my task as a graduate student was to develop a system which would try to find the road so that you can follow the road. We begin by looking for the road in the foreground of the vehicle, as you can see in these little squares, and once you find a bit of road, you propagate that road detection outwards. It was an explainable AI system in the sense that there was all kinds of knowledge built into the system. We knew, for example, that shoulders bordered roads, and if you couldn't find the road, maybe you could find the edge of the shoulder. And we knew that there were telephone poles often lining the sides of the roads. If you couldn't find the shoulder, maybe you could find telephone poles to help you figure out where the road is. So this embedded knowledge was really important to the task, and when it failed, it ran off the road to follow a stripe painted on a farmer's field. It could tell you why it failed. It thought this was a road or this was a telephone pole. Unfortunately, the system was very slow. The maximum speed we could achieve was about 20 kilometers per hour on straight road and about 5 kilometers per hour on curved road or obstacles, and it was somewhat brittle. Bottom line, it didn't work very well. If we fast forward 30 years later, here's an example video of what we can achieve with the current state-of-the-art in detecting the road. And this is work from my fellow computer science faculty colleague, Raquel Urtasun, who, as you may know, heads up the Uber ATG lab here in Toronto. Raquel is one of the world's foremost researchers in autonomous driving, and let me show you in real time how she's able to detect the surface of the road. Once you find the road, of course, your goal as a planner is to figure out where the vehicle traverses that free space in the road. Now, you might ask, what else is involved in driving? In fact, roads are one of 4 extremely important objects that we need to find in order to navigate the car. What else? We need to know where the other cars are because they share the road with us. We need to know where the pedestrians are because we don't want to hit them. And we need to know where the bicycles, the cyclists are. So in this work, again, Mikkel Urtasun, plus another fellow computer science faculty member of mine, Sonja Fiedler, who in turn is heading up the Nvidia AI Research Lab, have come up with a very nice demonstration of real-time detection of both cars, pedestrians, and bicycles. And when you see in the top frame is the 2D detection output, and in the bottom half you see the actual 3D detections, which give you the size and the orientation of the objects that it's detected. So as we traverse the road here, you see that it finds the cars, and shortly we'll jump to a cityscape scene where you'll see it detecting both pedestrians and bicycles. There we go. You can see the bicycles in yellow, the pedestrians in green. So you find the road, you find the cars, you find the bicycles, you find the pedestrians. That's the bulk of the autonomous driving problem, and you have to navigate without hitting any of those things. But in fact, there are many applications of AI now that are taking the world by storm, and I thought I'd spend a few minutes just sharing with you some of them. Some of them are real exciting, some of them are a bit scary, frankly, and we'll see which ones you react to. So the first one, this is an AI which generated this portrait, trained on about 15,000 portraits ranging from the 14th to the 20th century. It rendered this portrait. There you go. Moreover, it sold for over $400,000 at Christie's in an auction. So the question is, do you think Merrick's ready to have his presidential U of T portrait painted by the AI? I think not. Here's another example in medicine where using a deep learning system classified on tissue, on cancer tissue, the system on the right side distinguishes between 2 cancer types, the red and the blue, versus non-cancerous in the gray. And it turns out that half of the mistakes made by the AI were also misclassified by the pathologist. However, 80% of the mistakes made by the pathologist were correctly classified by the AI. So such a system could be a great assist to a radiologist or a pathologist. A second opinion, if you will. Here's another example.
Hi, I'm Mike. Well, kind of virtual Mike, really. This is our Digital Human project, which is a collaboration of a whole lot of companies. Epic Games, 3Lateral, Cubic Motion, Tensun, the Wiki Human team, Sydney Uni, FX Guide, a whole bunch of people coming together to produce, well, a virtual human. And not only a virtual human, but one rendered in real time. Puppeteered or driven in real time, rendered in real time, and not only that, but at 90 frames a second in stereo in VR.
That was synthetic. That was not real. And where is the AI, you ask?
Well,
the AI is the mechanism by which a real actor behind the curtain is having their facial gestures and facial motions tracked accurately by a computer vision system. You can see the rig in front of their mouth, which tracks their facial deformations and uses it to drive the avatar that you see rendered in real time. So computer vision used to acquire all the realistic motion and appearance of an actor and then create a digital avatar or digital actor, if you will. So an example of AI applied to entertainment. You've probably heard about the amazing successes of AI in games. In 2017, Google's DeepMind, a subsidiary of Google, their program called AlphaGo, beat the world Go champion, KG, by having it trained on games that humans played with other games. But shortly thereafter, a new version of the program called AlphaGo Zero was trained on just playing games with itself, and in the span of 3 days was able to overcome the original AlphaGo, beating it 100 games to 0. So some remarkable progress on the game playing front. Mattel is introducing its Hello Barbie. Like Siri or Alexa, it converts speech to text and then draws on about 8,000 lines of content that it has to carry on a conversation with your child. And I'll leave it for you to decide whether this is good for your child or not. Here's an example of Amazon Go, a concept developed by a close colleague of mine at Amazon. You walk through the turnstile, you scan your phone, it knows who you are, then you walk up to the shelves and you simply grab items off the shelf, right? And then you walk right out. There's no checkout lines of any kind. Can you shoplift? No. As soon as you take something off the shelf, it knows that you've got it. Unless you put it back on the shelf, you're going to see it on your bill when you leave. So it's revolutionizing convenience store shopping. Everyone recognizes that logo. It's the Domino's delivery robot, right? So it can travel up to 4 miles an hour on sidewalks, and when it gets to your home, it sends you a text message with a code. You walk out, you enter the code into the Domino robot, it opens up its hood, and out comes your piping hot pizza. The real question is, how do you tip the robot? Education. AI is having an impact on education. You've probably seen robots in museums helping kids to get excited about displays and exhibits, answering their questions. You show me a robot and I'll show you a swarm of fascinated kids huddled around that robot. Some AI and education researchers now talking about something called a lifelong learning companion, which accompanies your child to class, helps them with their homework, learns along with them. Your child can even learn how to be a good mentor or teacher to the robot, helping your child reinforce what they've learned. So exciting possibilities in education. Communication, language, enormous potential. Here's an example of Google Translate, which you've probably played with yourself. You can see that I punched in on the left. It's an honor and a pleasure to address you all on the topic of AI at this joint Empire Club, University of Toronto talk, etc. I converted to French using Google Translate on the right. And if we want to see if the translation's good for us non-French speaking people, let's take the French that it created, stuff it into the French side and translate back to English, and we get what you see on the lower right, which is almost perfect, right? It's an honor and a pleasure to speak to you all about AI at this joint conference between the Empire Club and the U of T. Well, it's not really a joint conference, it's a joint talk. But other than that, it does a pretty good job. Pretty impressive. Finding new worlds. Simon is an AI bot that floats around a space station until the astronaut calls its name. Then it navigates its microgravity environment in the direction of whoever's talking to it. Then it can assist you in conducting your experiments, show you instructional videos about what you're looking at, track what you're doing. Great application for online tutoring with a robot. The real question is, how does Simon respond when you ask it to open the pod bay doors? For those of you science fiction buffs. This is an example of brain-computer interfaces, another wonderful application of AI. In this case, we're helping people who have paralysis text what they think. So about 100 microelectrodes are planted into the motor cortex in your brain. The signals are sent to a digital computer, and then you learn to translate the intentions of the user into movements of a cursor on a keyboard so the person can basically type out the letters just by thinking them. Right? Turns out Facebook has a group of about 100 engineers working on a system that will detect you speaking silently in your head and translate into a text at 100 words per minute. And again, I'll leave that to you to decide whether that's a good thing for us or not. Another example, security robots. Security robots are ubiquitous now. They're patrolling factories at night, making sure there aren't intruders. They're patrolling parking lots, recognizing the license plates of cars that shouldn't belong there. They can issue warnings. They can call the cops. They can issue warnings of all kind, good or bad. And what I want you to do is focus on the robot to the left, the kind of cone head thing here, and have a look at this. This robot didn't do so well, so there's still a few bugs to iron out on the security robot front. And finally, let me show you a really compelling example, building robots in the image of ourselves. Pretty impressive. My worst nightmare is having this thing come to my door asking for Sarah Connor. You guys don't watch sci-fi movies as much as I do, clearly. Okay, so I can't talk about AI without acknowledging the impact that our own Jeff Hinton has, that Kent mentioned earlier. A major turning point in the AI revolution is the groundbreaking deep learning work that Jeff has done, one of my CS colleagues who in fact now leads the Google Brain team here in Toronto. Deep learning is having a transformational impact on both academia and industry, and many of the examples that I've shown you previously in the talk here are attributed to the success of deep learning. So a shout out to my colleague Jeff Hinton. But despite the successes that I've shown you in AI, there are some major challenges that we face. And I'm going to cover 3 categories of challenges. 1, scientific challenges. 2, ethical and societal challenges. And 3, educational challenges. So let's look at the scientific challenges first. So here's an example where deep learning systems trained to recognize objects are easily fooled. So what you see, let me get my pointer here. What you see on the left here are 3 images that were correctly classified by an AI system. It would have said that's a school bus, and that's some kind of grouse or bird, and that's some kind of pyramid. And what we do is we add some imperceptible noise to this image, and we get this image. And what you see is the imperceptible noise here magnified tenfold. That's how invisible the noise is. And yet when we add this noise to this image, the system completely fails in recognizing what these images are. In fact, we can steer it all to think that all these 3 things are ostriches. Go figure, right? And here's another example where we've taken these 3 correctly identified images, added some noise, and the system now thinks that all of these are ostriches as well. So it clearly doesn't understand the meaning of the pixels. It's just looking at pixel patterns. Here's an example of systems that try to understand the contents of the scene and then generate a caption describing the scene semantics. Doesn't do so well. A woman riding a horse on a dirt road, right? It gets worse. A group of people standing on top of a beach. And this one's a little horrific. An airplane is parked on the tarmac at an airport, right? So what's going on? It detected a plane. That's somewhere up high in the image. It detected some pavement. That's underneath. Oh, since plane is on top of pavement, and I've seen that at airport scenes, I must be looking at a plane on a tarmac. So really doesn't understand what's going on in the world. But we can fool these systems in language too. This was a great example demonstrated by Douglas Hofstadter in an Atlantic article recently. So typing in, again, to our Google Translate on the left, in their house, everything comes in pairs. There's his car and her car, his towels and hers towels, his library and hers. You understand the meaning of that. Yet Google Translate says, in their house, everything comes in pairs. There's his car and his car, their towels and their towels, his library and his, right? So it completely misinterpreted the meaning. If we then go back and take the correct translation, feed it into the left side there, you'll see that the translation from French to English is equally flawed. At home, they have everything in double. There's her car and her car, her towels and towels, her own library and her own library. So again, we're not looking at the true meaning of the words, no fundamental understanding of the world and what is trying to be conveyed in this utterance. So in fact, part of the problem is what we need is systems that look at the world and not images. So vision is not about looking at collections of pixels and images and more images, right? Vision is about looking at the 3D world that we have evolved in. The world has geometry and physics and dynamics and functionality. That's what we have to capture in our machine learning and our vision systems. And right now, there's no effective way of capturing that, and that's one of the scientific challenges we face. How do we encode that real-world information, physical and geometric knowledge, into our systems? We need new forms of knowledge representation and reasoning. Deep learning is only part of the solution. And in fact, the same thing holds for language. More data is not the answer. When you say to Robbie the robot, Robbie, please dress the turkey, this is not what you want, right? Not a literal dressing of the turkey. So, in fact, language is not about just patterns of words. Language is about word meaning, about speaker intention, and shared common sense knowledge of the world. And finally, something called explainable AI that you've seen, and I talked about explainable AI in my first slide, the system telling you why it concluded what it concluded, being able to reflect on the errors that it makes. So the problem is many of these AI systems are a black box and they give you an answer. Here you can see that an image of a cat goes in and the system thinks it's a cat with probability 93%. Very confident, right? But you don't know why it said that, right? You don't know how close the second closest object was. It can't explain why it thought it was a cat. It can't tell you when it fails or why it fails. You really have very little information from the system. Why is this important? Because when the robot surgeon is about to take your leg off and you ask why, you're not going to be satisfied with 0.93%. You're going to want to understand the reasons why it's going to operate in this way. So really what we need are explainable systems that generate some explanation interface, if you will, where now you know why it's drawing the conclusions that it is. It can articulate and reflect on why it makes mistakes. You understand when it works well and when it fails. And this kind of explainable AI is another scientific challenge facing our community. So for AI to truly succeed, AI researchers and engineers really must team up with experts across the disciplinary boundaries. The domain knowledge that we need encoded in these systems really comes from you, the people from these other disciplines. It's not up to computer scientists and AI researchers to make these systems work. It's up to them working closely in partnership with you to take the domain knowledge that you understand about the world and the problems you solve and work in tandem to build these systems and encode that important knowledge. It's not about just throwing more data at the system. We need the knowledge and expertise that you bring from your domain, and in that sense, each one of you has an important role to play in this AI revolution. So let's get on to the ethical and societal challenges, arguably the most important and most serious ones. Here's an example of an AI system that has racial bias. In a number of states in the US, there are systems that predict recidivism, the likelihood that you're going to reoffend once you're sent to jail. And judges look at the output of these models to decide how to issue a sentence or whether to issue bail or not. As you can see in these examples, a white male with a much more serious past record of offenses is assigned a lower risk than an African-American female with a much lighter past history of offenses. Similarly, on the right side, a white male with a very serious past record is considered in far lower risk than a black male with a much lighter past record. So this is a serious problem. We have to get in and ensure that these systems are trained in a fair way. Here's another example of gender bias, actually gender and racial bias. This system was trained on recognizing the gender in faces, right? And you can see that in the upper left, it recognizes the gender of white males with up to 1% error. However, for darker-skinned males, up to 12% error. But in fact, it's worse for women. On the left, we see up to 7% of lighter-skinned women, gender misclassified, but up to 35% of darker-skinned women. So serious problems in the training. We need to ensure that these data sets are unbiased. Privacy. Here's a company from China called SenseTime that has a real-time system for tracking all of the vehicles and pedestrians walking across the road. Right? It knows where you are. It knows where your car is. Similarly, that same company makes a method which can detect your face and identify you wherever you are. Now, some would argue that this is a good thing, right? If you could track everyone, think of all the crimes that you could prevent if you could call 911 and warn people whenever something bad's going to happen. When you detect an event that is dangerous to an individual, such surveillance might be very useful. On the other hand, who's going to hold this data? How do we ensure that you have privacy? How do we ensure that the data is not abused? Who governs the laws on using this data? These are big issues that we have to deal with. Here's another dilemma. Robots on the battlefield. The military argues that these battlefield robots save lives. If you're a mother, do you want to send your kid off to war and have their leg blown off by an IED when you could have some machine clear these mines for you? You could argue that this is a good thing. Humans should not be in these hazardous places fighting on the battlefield. On the other hand, what happens when the robot becomes a better killing machine than humans? Can we really expect militaries to resist using them on the battlefield? Still, some argue that this is a bad thing. If we remove ourselves from the human horror of warfare, we'll become further numb to this warfare, to this horror of war. So there's big debates going on the role of these kinds of AI systems on the battlefield. The impact of AI on employment. I know you've been waiting for this one. Stephen Hawking said in 2016, the automation of factories has already decimated jobs in traditional manufacturing, and the rise of AI is likely to extend this job destruction deep into the middle classes, with only the most caring, creative, or supervisory roles remaining. An Oxford University study a few years prior to that, 47% of US workers have a high probability of seeing their jobs automated over the next 20 years. And McKinsey recently, our research suggests that as many as 45% of the activities individuals are paid to perform can be automated by adapting currently demonstrated technologies. So there's probably nowhere more pronounced in terms of potential impact than autonomous driving, which you've heard in the news. And this is a map that shows that in some US states, as much as 9% of the workforce is employed in driving some kind of vehicle, a cab, a truck, so forth. So what's going to happen when these people are replaced by autonomous cars? Now, does that mean we should not build autonomous cars? Actually, I think we should. I think we need to do this kind of research because there are many good reasons to develop autonomous driving. Safety. Over 1 million people each year die in auto accidents around the world. The vast majority of them are due to driver error. If we can get this technology to the point where we save 1 million lives a year, or around 40 to 50,000 in the US alone per year, that seems like a good thing. Health. How much stress do we put on our bodies sitting on the DVP for 2 hours commuting from Richmond to downtown, to U of T, right? Puts an enormous health strain on our systems, right? That could be avoided if you could sit in the back seat and maybe drink cappuccino and read your email, right? But there's a serious health issue. Environment. Cars stalled or moving very slowly on the DVP put an enormous environmental strain in our city, right? Having more efficient drop-off of cars, having more efficient traffic flow, for example, reducing the number of cars, all of that can reduce the impact on the environment. Planning. How much wasted space in our city is spent on parking lots, for example? Imagine if we had a more efficient transportation system where we could turn those parking lots into green space. And finally, the overall cost. So these are good things. However, we have to be sensitive to the impact that these job losses have on our community. How and when do we redirect those vehicle drivers, or for that matter, anyone displaced by AI, to other careers? It has to go back into our educational system. We have to think ahead and proactively start thinking about who's going to lose their jobs and how do we react instead of being a purely reactionary response, which is typically the case. Finally, some educational challenges. There's a massive gender imbalance, right? So this is a chart that was data that was generated by a collaboration between Wired Magazine and Element AI. It says the gender imbalance in AI research across 23 countries, but in fact that should read machine learning research because the data only comes from 3 machine learning conferences, although I don't expect the data to look much better in the other disciplines, but this is really taking a small subset of the AI community. And you can see that roughly 88% of the authors of papers in these major conferences are men. This is a real issue. If we're going to come anywhere close to addressing the shortage of qualified people to build out this AI future, we need to find creative ways of engaging not only women, but young girls in science and math and encourage them into computing and AI careers. Major educational challenge. Maintaining a strong AI academy. On the left, you can see that more and more of our Ph.D. graduates are deciding not to go back to the academy, not to become professors, not to teach what they've learned to their students. More of them are going into industry. Who's going to teach the next generation of students? As you can see in this quote from a very famous professor at Cambridge University and also a chief scientist at Uber, Zubin Garamani, who in fact was a postdoc in our department at U of T, universities will have to train enough people to meet the demand, and that's a challenge if lecturers and postdocs are being lured into industry. It's like killing the geese that laid the golden eggs. Companies are starting to realize that, and some of the major tech companies are starting to give back to universities by sponsoring lectureships and donating funds. I mentioned to you Raquel and Sonia and Jeff are all spending much of their time at heading up research labs. There's Rich Zemmel, my close colleague in computer science, who is the scientific director of the Vector Institute, and myself. 5 examples of people that are spending less time on campus, but are in a position to perhaps work with the university to find an effective blended model that doesn't gut the university of its training infrastructure, and yet somehow brings together the opportunities afforded by these amazing research labs to connect with the students in an educational setting. So these are challenges that we face on the educational side. So, wrapping up with some take-home messages, I've shared a few examples with you of these kinds of AI systems. Enormous potential to increase the quality of our lives. It's here to stay. It's not going to slow down anytime soon. Familiarize yourself with how AI is transforming your discipline. Having some understanding of how and when to use these AI-based tools your community has adopted will give you a competitive advantage. AI is having an impact, as I said, on almost every corner of a major university and in industry and society. And I encourage all of you students to look for opportunities to study AI, data science, data visualization, etc., especially when it's offered within the context of your own discipline. Then you know how to use it to partner up with your own domain knowledge and have an impact on your discipline. Seek to understand the limitations of AI, and you'll be better prepared to evaluate its risks. Beware of the hype. When people say that AI outperforms a human on the same task, don't be too quick to be impressed. Ask not what the AI can do well, ask how and when the AI fails. That's what I always ask. I can learn more from these systems by watching how they fail, like those examples I showed you, really questioning how much intelligence does the AI really have. Be aware of the ethical implications of any AI technology before you adopt it. Easy to say, as we know we have a very poor track record of considering the consequences of our science before we adopt it. The Industrial Revolution, the automobile, carbon-based fuels, nuclear weapons, TVs, cell phones, etc. Right? But as Moshe Vardi, a distinguished AI professor who has studied the impact of AI in computing on society, has argued, understanding the ethics of AI, while important, is not enough. We need informed public policy, and that's where doing your homework can help. If you can somehow demystify what's going on and understand the strengths and weaknesses and pros and cons of this technology that you're going to be bombarded with, you'll be a more informed citizen and a more responsible citizen. So I encourage you to dig into it a little bit. Think hard about how we're going to cope with the increasingly intelligent machines. There's no question this revolution is going to happen, and while I believe that human-level intelligence is truly a long way off, we can't afford to be complacent. The more we can encourage society to prepare for these changes, the smoother the transition will be. And finally, the potential impact on the social fabric of our culture is enormous, and we would be wise to prepare for it. As machines replace many of our jobs, we'll have to rethink education and job training, what it means to even work, and how we can take care of each other at the end of the day. And let me just finish with 2 more slides. One is, there's no going back, and this is pretty compelling. But hey, we can do it together. Thanks very much. Sure.
Just stay up, please. So we have time for some questions here. If you'd like to say your name and what program you're in or what company you're from, for those of us who have come from the outside, that would be great. And we have time for 3 or 4 questions. Yeah, there's also microphones being set up. It looks like right now in the center. Yeah, perhaps if you can go to the mic, that would be great.
Liam Wilkinson from Jessen & Company, PR firm. The question is, to what extent will explainable AI systems solve the problem of systems that were trained on biased data?
Trained on biased data. That's a good question. I don't know that, unless they can self-reflect on the nature of the bias and detect the bias autonomously, I don't know that they can do that.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. My name is Casey, and I'm in my first year of the Masters of Science in Applied Computing here at the University.
Yes. Nice to see you.
So with regards to ethics around AI, I would say that, you can let me know if you agree with this. In general, I think the law generally tends to lag technology, just like as a general statement. And our legal system is already in such a state that it's hard for an individual who doesn't have access to a lot of resources or legal expertise to even begin to navigate that and make decisions about ethics. So with regards to the specialized nature of artificial intelligence, are you concerned about the fact that the pool of people who even understand this well enough to be able to make a cogent argument about whether or not something is ethical is even smaller than like what our legal system currently already requires?
Yes, I am very concerned. I mean, I think we're racing forward with this technology. I don't see a lot of public discussion and public forum. I think I don't see our educational system reacting to it. I see these reports and we just keep going on. Business as usual. I don't know how we're going to deal with the fact that the larger companies are employing fewer and fewer people. It's highly trained technical people at the major tech firms, which now are the largest firms in the world. So I think we need a strategy, and that's why Moshe Vardi suggests that it really is public. It's not just understanding the ethics of it, but it is public policy that needs to be shaped. There are lots of experiments, for example, the universal basic income, things that have been tried to look at to examine if we can subsidize people when they lose their jobs. A lot of people have given up on the notion of a single job with a company for many years, and now they're jumping around to smaller jobs, temporary jobs. Can we get them back into doing more creative things? I know people have been looking at that as well. So I am very concerned. But it's happened many times before, as I said, when we introduced new technologies, it's full speed ahead, and then we react to it. So that's why I presented the talk the way I did. And I teach a course in the last couple of years to first-year arts and science students to try to expose them to these kinds of issues so that they will think about them when their politicians are making claims about the technology or companies are making claims about the technology. But indeed, I'm worried about the lack of public discussion and the lack of informedness on the public's part about how this stuff works and when it doesn't work.
Hi, my name is Yoon-Sik Park, and I'm finishing my bioinformatics and computer science degree at U of T. So my question kind of relates a bit to what she just said. What happens when you have like people in highly privileged positions like doctors or lawyers, they start like having a very reactionary, they oppose these new technologies, maybe like saying that people should prefer the human version of these things or things like that, because I feel like they are in a position to, maintain their status quo.
Well, I'm not an HR person. I'm not a political scientist. I can't tell people how to run their companies or manage their people, but I think as a society we need to make sure that if there is a new technology that is displacing people, we need to reach back into the educational system and prepare them for that. I can't comment on how a manager should be dealing with the technology. Obviously, you've got these pressures on one side to make money, maximize revenue. You've also got the pressures on the other side to take care of these people. And who's going to take care of them when they're displaced out of jobs? Is it the company's role? Is it society's role? Is it the government's role? These are big questions, right? I don't have the answer to these questions, but I think we need to discuss them and understand what the options are.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ushnish Sengupta, PhD student at OEZ. So can we get AI systems to recognize harm before harm is done? So for example, you talked about the sentencing recommendations in prisoner recidivism, right? So like people did get longer sentences, right? And,
yes.
And they were put in jail. So how do we get the systems to recognize the harm before the harm is done?
I don't know that you can. I mean, these systems are trying to predict human behavior, and it's not clear to me that an AI system can ever understand the nuances of human behavior to be able to make a reasonable prediction. That's my own feeling. If the training data is balanced and unbiased, I don't know how these systems would work, but personally I feel uncomfortable with the concept of an automated system deciding the fate of a human being just based on collected data. That's my own personal reaction.
Hey, sorry if I stutter 500 times. I'm like super nervous. I'm sweating.
Yeah, I'm getting warm too. Excuse me for toweling off.
It's like a drop's coming down my armpit. Sorry.
Yeah, I hear you.
My name is Elvin. I'm studying neuroscience and mental health at UTSC. I'm doing my undergrad still, so like I'm a baby, sorry. I have two questions. So the first one is, what's the current status of AI and like recognizing microexpressions in, say, patients of some type of psychological therapy, let's say psychoanalysis or something?
Yeah, there is a lot of work on recognizing expressions and microexpressions. Facial expression recognition in general is a very hot topic in computer vision. There are commercial systems you can buy that recognize whether you're afraid or frowning and so forth. There are people that are studying by looking at the face whether you're lying or not, right? By looking at how the blood flow is distributed across your face. I have a colleague at Georgia Tech that is looking at how small children interact and make eye contact with a caregiver to determine whether they might have autism or not, as sort of an autism screening scenario. So faces are an extremely well-studied area of computer vision. Face detection, face recognition, facial expression analysis, facial rendering, all of these things are very mature, and there are systems that can indeed recognize all kinds of expressions, including micro-expressions.
So what I'm interested in is kind of taking one step forward and applying that in a therapeutic environment.
Yeah.
Do you think that's doable within, say, like the next 10 years?
I mean, this is exactly to my point. We need people like you to team up with AI people, sit down and study the problem and find out exactly what are the nuances of your problem, what is it that you need to recognize, how would you, the human expert, detect these micro-expressions, right? And then to work together. Without seeing what the problem is, and I'm not a facial expression recognizer expert myself, without seeing the problem, I don't know whether that's a solvable problem or not. But the dialogue between you and the computer vision person is the first step.
Cool. So that relates to my second answer. I mean, my second question, not answer. I'm not the expert. So I'm kind of wondering, like, I'm not an expert on AI. I'm not very smart. So in terms of like technology, how can I contribute to that field that I'm so interested in connecting to my own field when I know nothing about it? Thanks.
Like, it starts by coming to this talk, and as I mentioned, what we're seeing in universities now are AI courses that are not just geared for computer science students, but any kind of computing course for that matter, that is geared for students in other disciplines, taught in the vehicle of their discipline and what they need to know. So, you know, whether you're studying mechanical engineering or digital humanities in an English department or sociology, we need people in AI and computing to partner up with instructors and faculty members in those disciplines and co-design a course that gives you the right level of AI exposure that you need to be able to use the tools and solve your problems at the end of the day. So this is really one of the most exciting frontiers of education right now, is how to connect these kinds of technologies into the disciplines themselves. And you can't trust computer scientists to do that. Computer scientists have a lot to offer, but they need to partner up with people like you on the other side to really make it happen.
So kind of like a brain-brawn relationship where someone's providing the idea and someone else is kind of carrying it out.
Yeah, I mean, we need to understand what your problems are. We need to know what kinds of tools you need to learn, and then we work with you to teach those tools embedded in the context of your problems. So the students are motivated. They get to see problems in the discipline that they've chosen to study, not just autonomous driving or face recognition or whatever. They see things that mean something to them, and they only learn the tools up to the degree that they need to be able to use them in their own research and their own jobs.
You just like lifted my confidence so much right now. Thank you. Thank you.
Glad I could help.
Hi there. My name is Ubay, computer engineering student at Ryerson.
Nice to meet you.
My question sort of relates to hers. I'm currently working on a project with Ryerson where we're trying to get engineering and art students to work together, because I really believe there's a lot of potential there in the different knowledge that these two fields have. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on a point you said during your talk, that you wanted more fields to come in and pitch in about what they know.
So you said engineering, and what was the other?
Art.
Art.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a great application. Yeah, so I don't know personally of any field of computing or any discipline at a university that isn't touched somehow by computing and AI. So in terms of art, we saw an example where you try to teach a system to render art. There's lots of work on style transfer. So you take a photograph and you learn how to to render the photograph a la Van Gogh style, for example. So this learning styles from art and transferring them to rendering photographs. There is AI systems that try to generate and compose music automatically, including faculty members in our own department, Sonia and Raquel. There's art, there's AI to help animate, to create animation automatically, right? So there are many applications of AI in art. Some of them, I'm not particularly interested myself in those that replace the human artist and try to just generate a piece of art and stand back and say, is it nice or not, right? I think what's more interesting is how you use the technology to enhance the experience of generating art. How can you make tools that help artists do a better job and be more creative, right? Get some of the machinery out of the way and make the process easier and more nimble for them. That's what I'm particularly interested in.
Thank you. This next question will be the final question.
Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. Chair
thank you.
Faculty member engineering here at U of T. Question is, it seems as though AI will solve, or at least move to solve, a number of the challenges and problems we face in the world today. What are some of the challenges of tomorrow that perhaps will be caused by AI, machine learning, deep learning, etc.?
Well, aside from the job impact that I talked about, right? That's perhaps the biggest one. But let's go to this Hello Barbie example. You're entrusting your child to talk to this item. They're not going to be using their imagination the way they used to. They're going to get some scripted dialogue designed by a bunch of engineers at a company, right? Are you comfortable with that? Are you confident that these engineers are going to break down gender stereotypes? Are you confident that they're going to help your kid learn values that you think are important? No? They're going to sell these things, And people are going to entrust their kids to listen and learn from these robots, right? That's all it is. It's a robot. And whether it's the personal learning robot or whether it's the Hello Barbie or any of these objects, we are trusting these systems to a great extent. And we have to ask ourselves, is this good? Or how much should we trust them, right? How do we guide these systems? What kind of role do we play in terms of modulating how they're going to behave with us, right? These are big questions. So, you know, the issue of autonomous systems in general, displacing people from their jobs, is a huge potential problem that we're going to have to deal with. The issue of, do these systems truly understand when we communicate with them? What do we entrust our children with in terms of these systems? How is it going to affect education and play, imagination forming and so forth? Values, right? So there's many problems. I'm sure I could think of more if I had more time, but I can see many potential issues that we're going to deal with. The battlefield robots, how we're going to conduct warfare, privacy issues. I mean, all of these systems, the better these systems get, the better than we are they become at many tasks, and there's lots of implications for that in general, right? I don't know how we'll deal with that, but we got to think about it and have this dialogue and discussion and be proactive about it.
Professor Sven Dickinson, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just give another big thanks to both the Empire Club and U of T. It's always an honor to be here addressing students. It's an honor to be a part of this distinguished talk series. And again, thank you all for coming out on such a miserable night. And thanks to my family and friends who also came out. It's a real treat to have them here. Thank you.
So now I'd like to invite CIBC up to thank Professor Dickinson for speaking. And from CIBC, we have Tesbir Singh, who's going to come to the mic. Thanks, Tesbir.
So on behalf of CIPC, I want to thank the Empire Club of Canada and University of Toronto for this partnership, and especially Professor Sven for such an insightful talk on AI. The part on the explainable AI was especially intriguing to me. So we do work within the analytics part of the bank. And within the bank, what we've sort of identified is that being an insights-driven organization is going to be key to stay ahead of competition. And we've identified data as one of the key inputs, which we have plenty of. Technology and processes that we've already invested in. But the most scarce, as you pointed out, is the human capital. And that's why partnerships like this, where we are able to tap into universities, is what we are trying to focus on. So human capital who understands both business and the technologies of modern and cheap prediction would be our focus. Quickly wanted to mention three things because we are at U of T. One, the bank has started a data studio, which is focused completely on innovation in analytics and AI, which is in Waterloo, where we get fresh talent to come and join us. For the students who are currently in any kind of post-secondary program, can participate in a data visualization competition that we run in partnership with Deloitte and Tableau. And as a professor you were mentioning, the focus of that is data storytelling. So how can we tell better stories with data? And that's a starting point before even we start predicting something. And the third one is we're starting an analytics leadership program. So a rotational program specifically for students with analytical background and interest, which will be a 2-year program, and students joining the bank as full-time employees would actually work in 3 different departments focused on analytics.
Great.
So thank you.
Very good.
So that brings our evening to a close. I want to thank all of you for coming today. The Empire Club has a number of great events. And I invite everyone to get involved, to go to our lunches, to go to our evening events. When the end of the year rolls around in January, we'll have had 16 events since September. There'll likely be the same amount until June. We have things popping up all the time. This week we have a healthcare event on Wednesday. On Thursday we have Andrea Horvath. We also have, coming up in the next weeks, the Federal Environment Minister. We have Ralph Goodale coming. And we have all kinds of events in the new year. So for those students who aren't familiar with the Empire Club, our role, we view ourselves as a podium to have Canadian conversations, to produce the conversations that matter in Canada. And that's what we've been doing for 115 years. And it's my pleasure to be doing this at the University of Toronto in partnership with U of T and to host such a great speaker as Sven Dickinson. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.